daddy was from Tennessee. He was in the Army with First Army. And when he got out of the Army, he came down to Texas, and that's when he met my mother. My mother and her sister had gone into Fort Worth to sit in the counter to get some Cokes or something to drink. And in came my daddy in the front door of that store. And my mother said to her sister, "I'm gonna marry that man." And he came over and got himself acquainted with them, and they married. They married in 1920. I was born in Chester County, Tennessee. My parents brought me to Texas when I was 7 months old. Well, I'm 91, and I was born in 1923. I was in school at Newark Elementary. They just had one little school. When we lived in Newark until we moved into Fort Worth, my daddy farmed. And at the lake, we had a lot of catfish, and he would cook up a lot of catfish, and our families from Fort Worth would come out on Saturday night. We'd have plenty of catfish. But he was a worker. He worked. In fact, one night, he had a cow that he wanted to take to the stockyards, and he got one or two others to go with him to take that cow down to the market. He walked every step of the way from where we lived to downtown, and he got in there the next morning. When he came home the next day, he was worn out from walking so much. But he was great at, keeping a job, keeping the family going. And Mother never had to work. We moved back into Fort Worth, and I started to elementary school on the north side, Diamond Hill. And then I go ahead and graduated from there. And after that, I got a job working at Montgomery Ward's. And then, let's see, Bill and I married. I came to Hurst with my husband, Bill Souder. And we didn't have a place to live, so we stayed in the back of his mother's grocery store until we found a little rent house that we could afford. And after that, Bill had to go to service. He was in the 103rd Infantry, and he left and came back in, he was gone 3 years. But everybody was worried about the war. They couldn't keep from being worried about it. And we had a couple of 3 boys killed while they were over there. William Letchworth Hurst. The name of this town was named after him. When he came in from Tennessee, he had 4 children, I believe, at that time. In later days, he had a big wad of children, about 14 total. But he, coming in, he didn't have a job, but he made his money by buying and selling land. And he gave Rock Island Railroad the property for the train where it is now. Thomas Jefferson was a cousin to Grandpa William Souder. William D. Souder was Hurst was named after him. Well, it would be my husband's great-grandfather. That was made when I lived on Belknap Street in Fort Worth. When the person came by that wanted to take a picture, they had that with them, and Mother put me on that. She wanted a picture. My daddy had, before this picture was made, my daddy rushed me out of bed one night at 1 o'clock in the morning. Our house was on fire. And he grabbed me, cover and all, and went out to the next door neighbor and shoved me across their front porch. They had a long porch, and that waked me up. Then he went back to the house to get my mother and the baby girl, and as he got to the door, she was coming out and had the baby in one arm and grabbed a bird cage with a bird in it with the other one. He was a cousin, and he liked to hunt. That was the deer he killed, and it was a big one. Albert Souder was a brother to Bill's grandfather, Souder, and that was his second wife. His first wife died, and she became, Ann was her name. My grandfather taught my dad and the other boys how to lay brick, and so he went to laying brick, and he was a good one. He's bricked all of our houses up, and he always had a garden and kept it going. And Mother never worked. She was always at home, and they were busy all the time. Good people. And after we had 2 children, a boy and a girl, Bill wanted to go back to Tennessee. We'd make a visit to Tennessee, and that was where he had lived before. And I thought, I've never seen a place like this, but that's where he lived when he was a boy. Emma was the grocery store. That was his mother, and she would start at 6 o'clock in the morning, and at 6 o'clock in the evening, if people were coming in to just buy a cigarette, she'd stay because that was company to her. She lived alone there and did her grocery store. And of course, when Bill left to go to overseas, she was very upset when she hears about any of the problems that were going on over there. So we tried to make her happy by talking to her and visiting with her and everything. On the afternoons, when they would be busy with customers, I would get a phone call, "Can you come now? If you can't come now, don't come at all." That's when the people maybe came in. And I got behind the meat counter. But first, I got me an apple and a slice of meat and had me a little sandwich back behind the counter. We didn't have much of a community when we moved to Hurst. It was just hit and miss. Well, there wasn't but one main street. That was where Bill's mother's grocery store was, on that one. And then the Smith family had a small grocery store that was right next door to her. That was the 2 grocery stores, period. He was the first postmaster, and he had 3 boxes when he put it in his mother's store. The part that you'd naturally use it for filling your gas, it was very small, but that was the first post office. And it grew from there across the street to another area. Later, he built the new building. It was very large. It was on one of the streets real close to where his old post office was. And then a second new building was when I was working for Pete Guerin, and he and Pete went over to Dallas and got in touch with a man that could set up the second big post office here in Hurst. He went on the council for 5 years, and then they asked him to run for mayor. So he just, year before last now, he lost by 2 votes. He served on the council for 5 years, and they called him to run for mayor, and he was elected for mayor. And I tried to get him not to run that last time, but he did anyway. He lost by 2 votes. It was because I was trying to encourage him not to vote anymore, so not to run anymore, because he'd been there. Post office and that too, he'd done his shell. We've moved from Hurstview on the highway down 5 blocks to Hurstview. My dad built our house, and he built his house across the street from us, and they're still being used still in service, and they were facing the highway, and the street between the two is Hurstview. And then Bill came in one day and he found 5 acres that he liked, so we bought the 5 acres and built a house there and lived there 28 years. There was an elementary school across the street from Bill's mother's store, and so that's where the kids all went to school there, at that elementary school. And then they went to junior high school and then high school in Hurst. All 3 of our kids did. There wasn't much places to shop, so we'd have to go into Fort Worth. If we did any shopping, of course, those days you didn't have a lot of money to shop with. It was a Western store, and my friend and her husband had set it up, and they asked me to work for them, and I did. And then there was a second girl who worked for us. And when on Saturdays, the gentleman, her husband, would come in and collect for the store, and we sold, right and left, jeans and all kinds of Western clothes. And we were next door to a men's Western store. Several churches. We always went to First Baptist, and there was a great Methodist church there, a very large church that's still there and still large. And our church divided and went and built a larger church, and we stayed where we were. People went to Sunday school and church, and our kids did too, and the schools were great. Our kids graduated from all of the schools, the high schools and everything, and we never had any problems with our schools. Had good preachers, teachers. It's been a great place for us to live. I can't think of anything I'd want to do any better. I may not know all the people, but we've had a good life here with everybody. In fact, Bill wouldn't want to live anywhere else.